Hello and welcome in or welcome back to my channel. I'm Deb from DG Reads and it's time for another ARC attack. If you're not familiar with my ARC attack series, this is basically my excuse to keep up with some really anticipated reads, things that I've received advanced reader copies or advanced listener copies from authors and publishers, and get some reviews. So hopefully I can get them out before publication date to help you decide if it might be a book for you or not. I have a lot of releases coming out in March that I'm really excited to get to. I've got one that didn't quite make it into the last video. That's a little overdue, but that's okay. We're going to get to that one too. And I never quite know exactly what I'm getting to as I start this off. So you will find out as I find out which books I pick up. So once I get to my first book, I will be back with initial thoughts. I'm currently halfway into Jane and Dan at the End of the World by Colleen Oakley. This is a gifted copy I received from Berkley and PRH Audio. In this one, we're following a married couple, and the wife, Jane, has been contemplating for quite some time the idea that their romance really is over. They like each other, she even loves him, but it's just not working. It's not something that's bringing her joy anymore. They've done the books, they've done the different strategies to try to revive the marriage, and as far as she's concerned, it's over. Dan is not on the same page with her. As the book opens, it's their 19th wedding anniversary, and Dan won in a raffle the ability to make a reservation at this really fancy frou-frou restaurant. The type where the chef is in charge, you can't do substitutions, you can't change your order, you can't do anything. It's going to cost a fortune, and yet you're possibly going home hungry. But in the middle of this dinner, and in the middle of Jane telling him that she wants a divorce, things go very wrong. They wind up in the middle of a crime, and nothing is going as expected. What's really strange about it also is that Jane once upon a time published a book, I think it was 6 years ago, and it didn't do that well, but it did sell. But what's really strange is she keeps recognizing what's happening as having a lot of similarities, almost word for word in moments, as the book she wrote. We do get a glimpse very early on in the book of Jane being questioned by the police, and they are asking her about this book. So we don't know exactly how this is all going to tie together, of course, but there is a lot of intrigue with that. And so far I'm having a really good time with this one. I made it halfway in very quickly today. I had to put it on pause because I wanted to be able to do a midway update before I flew through the second half of the book. I am really interested in this relationship between these two and whether it can possibly be salvaged by the end. It sounds like there's some miscommunication between the two of them. They have children involved as well, and there's a lot of questions about what their way forward is going to be. And the chaos and the stress of this whole situation, of them being in the middle of this crime, is certainly not helping matters. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to wind up and where this author is going to take the story. So I'll be back once I finish the book with my final thoughts. I'm back with some ARC updates, and I finished up Jane and Dan at the End of the World yesterday at the very end of my workday, so it was a very satisfying end of day completion. A really good multitasking book, quite frankly, when I was doing some mindless tasks at work, and I had a good time with it. I think it took an interesting look at marriage and relationships and how that changes over time and what expectations are for romance, for a relationship over time. It definitely looks at parenthood and how that even changes over time as children are getting older. It had some funny moments, it had some tension moments, it had a lot of good things going on with it, and I enjoy Colleen Oakley's writing quite a bit. So this worked out really well for me. I gave it a solid 4 stars and will definitely look to pick up more from this author in the future. And then while we're at it, I do have one more update. Confession time, I was meant to read The Weekend Guest by Liza North for my last ARC attack, but I didn't get to it in time, in particular because this is one I only had a physical copy of, and life just got in the way of me getting time to sit down and do eyeball reading. So this one actually just came out as of the time I am filming this. It was released right at the end of January, so this is out in the world, but since I did have an ARC of it and did want to read it, I decided to go ahead and do it as part of this arc attack. This one is set primarily in an isolated, kind of really fancy, along the cliffs type of wealthy person home. And the people who own this house have called a bunch of old friends from their younger days, old roommates and friends, together to just have a weekend to catch up and reacquaint themselves with each other. Some of them they haven't seen pretty much since they were college age, that type of age. They've got a nanny there to take care of the kids. They've got food and drink and games and jogs along the beach, and it seems like it should be a good time. However, from the prologue, we know things have gone wrong. Something about the children being missing and everyone else might be dead. They've brought in partners who weren't part of the original friend group. They've got histories between each other, and there's something going on with some postcards that have been sent to one or more of them, talking about secrets from their past that are about to be uncovered. This is all happening in 2019. There's also a past timeline that's happening in the early 2000s, I think around 2001, and it goes over a span of time. I think we wind up changing years at some point, but this is being written from the perspective of Daryl, who was a neighbor to this group of friends, and he has weird stuff going on. I've kind of made some guesses about some of it. Some of it seems a little bit obvious, potentially, but he's socially awkward. He's working on his PhD. He's kind of become obsessed with this friend group and wanting to be part of them and wanting to think that he has friends, and they kind of allow him to be a little bit a part of it, but also you can get the sense that he's missing some of it, but they're feeling like his involvement's getting a little weird at times. So he's not in the present day storyline. We don't know why, and that is intriguing. So far, I'm liking this. It's not one that I am finding hard to put down, which is unfortunate with an eyeball read, but I am liking the present day storyline much more than the past, and I would say so far equally, we're getting about half and half between the present and the past, and I was feeling like I want more of the present day storyline. The whole idea of these kids going missing, of course, would be a horrible thing. I don't feel like I know the kids or the parents' involvement necessarily. We've got one mom with a baby, and there's a lot of discussion about her needing to go and breastfeed and all of that. Other than that, the kids are just kind of there for the most part, so I'm not sure how I'm going to wind up feeling about this one by the end, but I'm going to keep going and get into the second half, and I'm hoping things are going to start picking up. So far, it's just been kind of relationship drama, and I'm expecting things to get more thrillery as the book goes. I've now finished up the weekend guests, and ultimately I was disappointed by this one. I feel like the ending was just a little too anticlimactic for me. I think I guessed a lot of what the reveals were going to be, and I never did fall in love with the past timeline and the character we were following, Daryl, from then. I feel like maybe if we had gotten a little more of the present timeline and following and getting to know all of these characters a little bit better, I might have liked it more overall. We're basically, for most of the book, switching back and forth between Daryl's past timeline and someone from the present timeline. So for every chapter for one of the present timeline characters, we're getting 6 of Daryl's chapters, just the way it gets spaced out. So I didn't feel like we got to know the present day characters that well, and I didn't love the Daryl characters. So I think that just kind of worked against me a little bit. I think at the end, there were some interesting reveals. There were a couple things I didn't predict, but overall, it just didn't wow me. It didn't fully suck me in. It's not one I'm going to widely recommend. I think if it's one that you're interested in, go ahead and pick it up, but if you're not jiving with the characters at the beginning, I don't think that's going to change a lot by the end of this particular book. I wound up giving it a 3-star because I think the plot was good, but it's more of a 2.5 to 3 if I'm being honest with it. So I think in general, the writing was fine. The characters, for what we got of them, pretty well developed. I thought that they were pretty distinct. Not so much the side characters or the children, but the main characters. I felt like I got to know them by the end of the book. The plot itself, I just wanted a little something more out of it to call this one really a thriller or a mystery. I'm not sure how it's exactly classified. It just was lacking a little something for me. So onwards to the next one, hopefully more of a success. I I've picked up The River Has Roots by Amal El-Mohtar, and this one is a ARC I received from Tor.com, and it's coming out on March 4th. This is one of the authors of This Is How You Lose the Time War, which I really loved, so I've been eagerly anticipating this one. And just even before I talk about the book itself, it's really just a really pretty book. There's a lot of pages in here, since this is of course the advanced copy, where it has marked for art to come. So I think there's going to be a lot of pretty graphics in here, would be my guess, when it is all said and done. I am now 52 pages of the way into this one. It's only 130 pages total, and a good number of those actually are the blank pages where there's going to eventually be art in here. So it is a very quick read, and a lot of the pages don't even have that many words on it because of the pretty layout that they've given us. This is very lyrical. We're following two sisters, and primarily we're following Esther, and they are part of the Hawthorne family. The Hawthorne family has kind of this legacy where they sing to the professors, and it's a world where grammar is kind of a magical system, and I don't have a full grasp on exactly what that means, but it plays a lot with language. There's discussion about riddles and poetry and singing and paying kind of honor to the professors, which are two trees, I believe, on two different sides of a river, perhaps. Again, don't have a full grasp because it is very lyrical. It's very beautifully written. I don't know that I feel like I necessarily have quite enough of a grasp of everything happening in here, but once you kind of get into the narrative, the story of the sisters, and particularly, like I said, Esther so far, is very easy to follow. There's just a lot of kind of lead up to it. It's talking about the river and how the river has a voice, and there's the land of the fairy, there's the land of human, and Esther kind of is crossing between those two worlds, and she's having this romance with someone from the other side, and this is kind of at odds with the fact that she's also being wooed with a man from the human realm who is approaching her as kind of a business venture, if you will. So the synopsis for this one says, follow the river Liss to the small town of Thistleford on the edge of Fairy and meet two sisters who cannot be separated even in death. So there's definitely an ominous tone. Things aren't going to go well entirely necessarily for our sisters, so I am intrigued to keep going with this one. It's a very quick read. I anticipate I will be back fairly soon with final thoughts. I've returned because I've finished The River Has Roots, and turns out I actually kind of lied to you mistakenly. The book is actually only 99 pages, including all those blank pages, so I actually was at the halfway point when I checked in last time. There's a preview of an upcoming short story collection, I think it says. Yes, short story collection from this author at the end, so a lot shorter even than the small link says. And I actually wound up really loving this in a lot of ways. I think I got much more invested in the second half. I really like the way this plays with language, the way it plays with relationships, the way it kind of gives a fairy tale feel to the whole story. There's a darkness to it, which is not uncommon in a fairy tale, and there's hope as well in here. There's beautiful imagery, there's transformations, there's just a lot going on in here. There's melancholy and happiness kind of in equal measures, I would say. I think story-wise, it just took me a little bit too long to get fully invested for such a short book. I think to make this like a 5-star read for me, but it's a very, very strong 4-star in the end. I would recommend this to people who like lyrical language, who like things that aren't necessarily fully straightforward all the time. It's not a hard magic system. There's things that work a little timey-wimey, you know, it might work out one way in one moment and a different way in a different moment. Things will happen in their own time, and that's not always my preference in books, but in this case it kind of worked for me. I really loved the writing, and I think As long as I'm in the mood for that type of lyrical writing, this is an author I will absolutely pick up again. I would be very curious to check out their short story collection. I don't think it's giving the name of the collection in here. The story that's in here is John Hollowback and the Witch, and I'm assuming that's just the story name, not the collection name, but it is something I will keep an eye out for. So with that, I will go ahead and leave this here and be back once I start my next arc. For my next arc, I decided to pick up Count My Lies by Sophie Stava, and this one is going really quickly so far. This is a gifted copy I received from Scout Books. It's due out on March 4th. In this one, we're following Sloane, although we start the book calling her Caitlin, and she tells the reader that she's a liar. She lies about little things. She's lied her entire life. She's always wanted to make herself sound more important, more interesting, and to have a life that was more interesting than the one she was really living. So things like telling kids when she was growing up that her father was famous, to in the present day, as the book opens, telling a little girl with a bee stinger in her foot and her father that she's a nurse, and she has medical advice to give them, saves the day, and winds up getting pulled into this family. She gets offered a job with them as a nanny. She becomes basically best friends with the wife. She's obsessing over the husband, and honestly just obsessing over this family in general. She's really good at what she does. She really has worked with kids in the past, but something went really wrong the last time. We see a few sneak peeks of what that was, but we don't really for sure know, other than obviously she has the ability to get obsessed with people, and I'm assuming at some point that takes a dark turn. Like I said, it's going really quickly. I sat down last night thinking I'd maybe read 50 pages. I wound up reading 150 before I had to go to bed, and it is just a really easy one to get sucked into. I wouldn't say it's quite not put downable, but it certainly has short enough chapters that you just flip the page and think, one more, just one more. And it's one of those kinds of books. So I am looking forward to finding out what direction this is going to take, because from the synopsis, we know that this family has secrets too. There are some weird interactions that have happened. There's been a few things that our main character has seen happening that the family doesn't know she's witnessed, things she's found. So there are a lot of questions to be answered in the second half of this book, and I'll be back with my final thoughts. My ring light died on me, so my lighting here is even worse than normal. It's not even great to begin with anyway, but I did want to give you some updates regardless. So I finished up Count My Lies last night, and I had mixed feelings on this. It was very easy to read. It was a quick binge. It definitely had me questioning things. The halfway point took a really big turn that I wasn't expecting, so that was all positive. The ending, however, got to the point where it just took a little too much suspension of disbelief in terms of how things played out and how people outside of this situation perceive things, and the idea that the setting they were in allowed for certain things to happen, trying to be very vague here, was just a little bit too much for my brain to process as it was. The plot conveniences definitely were convenient, and some of that just pushed me a little too far. I think in the end this one winds up being like a low 3.5 for me. I still had fun with it for the most part, considering it was an eyeball only read, and I made it through it really in 3 reading sessions, which is pretty good for this type of thing. I think it had its benefits for sure. So not a bad book, just not a new favorite, and had a few issues with it. It would be a good one to discuss though. I did also start my next book. And on a whim today, I picked up The Haunting of Room 904. This is by Erica T. Wurth, and I have a gifted copy thanks to Macmillan Audio. This is coming out on the 18th of March. This is the author who wrote White Horse, which I enjoyed, although I had a few quibbles and issues with it, but overall enjoyed, so I was excited to pick this one up. In this one, we're following Olivia, and she has the ability to communicate with the dead. It's something that her sister did, and she's become a very sought after paranormal investigator using this ability. When she's contacted by the hotel where her sister died to conduct an investigation there, she uncovers a lot of secrets that she didn't know about what her sister was involved with, what ultimately happened to her sister, and she begins investigating this case. She learns that this particular room at this particular hotel has a pattern of finding women there who have died. And it doesn't matter if the room has been given to this person, it doesn't matter if they try to leave this room, whatever circumstances are going on, eventually whatever woman whose time it is going to be dead in room 904. This has been a really interesting read so far. I got through the first half of it really quickly today on audio, and I'm very intrigued to continue on. My battery very rudely died in the middle of me talking just then, so ankle change probably has occurred. But as I was about to say, there is definitely a trigger warning with this one for suicide, because the sister's death has been labeled as a suicide. As the story goes on, maybe or maybe not, there's other things at play here, but I did want to point that out. The book opens at the very beginning with our main character conducting kind of a seance and investigation, trying to figure out what has been going on with a haunted box of sorts. And that was a really strong hook at the very beginning for this one. And then we start getting into issues of the hotel, and that has me super intrigued. So I'm really looking forward to continuing on, and I'll provide you with my thoughts when I finish the book. I've finished The Haunting of Room 904 and generally had a good time with this book. I think it is not necessarily one that's going to stick in my head really well, but I really was intrigued to keep reading. I never wanted to put it down or stop at any point, so a very quick audiobook binge. When I picked up the second half, I flew through it. This winds up mixing indigenous mythology, Hispanic culture, and Jewish mythology kind of all together in some interesting ways. I can't obviously speak to the representation of these different cultures. I know from reading this author's previous book that indigenous culture is definitely part of their history and knowledge base. I'm not sure about the Jewish representation. There's a lot of interesting relationships going on in this book as well, between the main character and her involvement with different people, the side characters and their relationships as well, and of course the really complicated relationship that our main character has with her sister, who has died, who has been through very similar things in her life before she died in terms of having involvement with the paranormal, and our main character having maybe believed or not believed certain things, and she has guilt out of that as well. And then that of course even complicates the relationship that she has with her mother and with even some of the people around them who knew both of them as well. I think the mystery elements of this one were well done. There were reveals along the way that I didn't expect. In the end, I've seen this one kind of labeled with different things. It wasn't heavily horror in my mind. It was very atmospheric. It definitely was paranormal. It definitely was a mystery with thriller elements. It was a bit of a mix of things, but in the end, I wound up giving this one 4 stars because I had a good time. I think the writing was good. I think the development of the character and the blending of different cultures and the discussions about identity and the diverse cast all came out quite well in my mind. So with that, I'll be back once I've read my next book. I've made it halfway into Kills Well with Others, and this is the sequel to Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn, and I have a gifted copy of this one from Berkley Publishing and the audiobook from PRH Audio. This is quite honestly a sequel I didn't know to expect, or whether I necessarily needed a sequel to this book, but I had so much fun with the first book that of course I immediately requested a copy of this one. This series is following a group of older women. They, in the first book, are reaching retirement age from their long careers as assassins. They worked for a company known as the Museum, and they were doled out people to target, and they went out and killed them. In the first book, they were celebrating this retirement, and then they realized someone was out to get them, and lots of chaos chaos and fun ensued from that. In this book, I think it's been about a year since that one ended, and they are enjoying their retirement to varying degrees. They are experiencing relationships and what it's like to stay in one place for a long period of time when the head of the museum calls them to come see her. And it turns out there's something about one of their past experiences that has come back up. It seems that there's maybe a mole in the organization, and it seems that someone is going after people that they worked with that were connected with former cases. The head of the museum needs their help to track down what exactly is going on. This is flying under the radar, and bringing in some retired ladies will help that along. I'm having a good time with it so far. I am looking forward to continuing on with it, and I will be back once I have some final thoughts. Checking in my PJs, because today was one of the days where you just had to go home and immediately put PJs on, but I did pick up a cupcake on the way home, so at least I have that to look forward to. And I have been doing some good reading today. So I finished Kills Well with Others, and I had a good time with this one. I don't know that I have that much to add compared to when I last updated you, but it was an engaging story. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the fact that they have this deep friendship, but not everything is always necessarily perfect. Especially when things go wrong, there's understandable moments where they get upset with each other, and so on and so forth. I still don't think this was 100% necessary sequel, but I think it's a fun set of characters. They have a lot of potential for storylines and relationships and twists and turns within the story that it made for a really good read. So this was a 4-star read for me. And then since I was on a roll with my ARC reading, I did pick up another one. And that is Tilt by Emma Pattee. And this one I believe is on sale March 25th. This one says March 4th, but I think I've seen it get pushed back to the 25th on different sources. So I'm going with that concept. Either way, it's coming out in March. This one is a relatively short, quick read. I have this gifted from Simon & Schuster, and I also have the audio ARC, which is what I was listening to today, and that's from Simon Audio. In this one, we're following Annie. She's 9 months pregnant, and she's at IKEA shopping for a crib for her unborn child. And while she's there, a really severe earthquake hits, and there's massive destruction. She has to be pulled out of where she winds up, and she's hoping to get to her husband. She winds up having to walk all the way to where he works, and she's basically spending this time talking to her unborn child about what she's seeing around her, about their life, about whether or not they were prepared for this, and we're seeing the wider world and everything that has happened around her and the trauma that people have been through, both physically and mentally, but also we're hearing about this relationship that she and her husband had and some of their struggles and their journey into parenthood and all of that. I was a little nervous coming into this one because pregnancy as a main kind of thriller horror subject is not necessarily for me, but I think in here there's enough of this kind of disaster area stuff, there's enough of the wider world, there's just general feelings more than just pregnancy that I am staying really well engaged in this. I'm trying out some new crochet stuff and doing that while I listen to this, and that's working out quite well for me. So far I'm having a good time. I'm about 40% of the way through this one. I'm not sure what the kind of objective of the story is yet, other than her survival and trying to find her husband and not let anything bad happen to herself or to the baby. But definitely living in Los Angeles, earthquakes are something that is always a looming threat. So I think that also makes this very interesting. From the synopsis, I do know that this is set over the course of a single day, so I'm not expecting any sort of super huge overarching plot, but I am intrigued to see where we go, and I'll let you know when I get to my final thoughts. I finished up Tilt today, and I had some mixed feelings on this one. I think It did a lot of things really well. I think the introspection of our main character and her thought process and the whole setting of this earthquake and all the thoughts that brings up for her were all really well done. I think the fact that this earthquake's kind of like a backdrop to the fact that her marriage is all rocky and somewhat breaking apart. Her venture into motherhood has her feeling really unsettled as well. Her own relationship with her mother as well plays into that. I think all of that was really well done. I think it just didn't quite get to an ending that I felt like it really wrapped things up for me. We are basically following her on this hunt for her husband and what's happened to him. This is set in the Pacific West. It's a very bad earthquake. Things are really difficult. You do see some really heartbreaking moments. You hear about the dangers of an earthquake, but also kind of witness some of that. But in the end, this left me feeling like it was a little unfinished. It didn't quite resolve things I wanted resolved. And I'm not someone who's really bothered by a open-ended ending, but in this case, it just felt like it was too open-ended, perhaps. I still gave this one a low 4 stars. It was still a good read. It kept me engaged. It was just the ending that didn't quite land for me. So overall, this is an author I would definitely try again, and I do think it's worth checking out if you don't mind an open ending and you're looking for a nice short read. This is one that has potential and good character development and emotion and all of that going on in it. So with that, I will go ahead and be back once I have more updates. I have picked up what is most likely my final arc for this particular arc attack, and this is The Good Samaritan by Toni Haldeen, and it is due out on March 4th, and I have a gifted copy from Harper. This one we begin with Matthew, and he's driving not entirely safely. He's had a few drinks, but there's a storm. He's heading home from having visited his daughter, and he finds a young boy on the side of the road, basically, under a tarp. There's a storm going on, the kid's unresponsive, and he makes the decision, rather than calling the police, who might catch on to the fact he's had a drink or two, and puts the kid in his car with the intention of driving him to the hospital. En route, the kid wakes up, doesn't want to go to the hospital, winds up running away, but still Matthew winds up kind of sucked into this boy and this boy's story. As we continue on the book, we're reading different POVs. We have a social worker who's assigned to this kid's case, and we have Claire, who's Matthew's daughter and is a high schooler, and her story. There's a lot of moving parts in here, and I wound up spending most of the first half of this book. I'm currently 138 pages in, which is a little short of halfway, figuring out how these POVs are going to wind up connecting together. I think that took a little bit of time to come together for me in my mind, but I did get through the first half of this very, very quickly, and I think it will be an easy binge read to continue on with. So we've got a lot of issues in this book. Matthew and his wife, ex-wife now, lost their son, who was just shy of 4 years old, and this is something that still weighs heavily on him. His daughter now lives 2 hours away, and he has weekend visitation, so I think some of that is playing into his feelings about this boy that he found and everything he's starting to learn about this boy's situation and what's going on with him. There's a foster family involved, and you get the sense very quickly that something's not entirely on the up and up with this foster family, and I'm really curious to see where this is going, because at this point I really don't know. So Kylie's making a lot of noise in the background. Apologies for that. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up so I can get back to reading and let her play without me having to tell her to keep quiet, which obviously is not working. So I'll be back once I have final thoughts. I'm back with my final thoughts for this Arc Attack vlog. I finished up Good Samaritan, and I honestly was underwhelmed. I think when I did the midway update, I said I wasn't sure yet what the point of this was, and ultimately I kind of still am in that position. The stories did all tie together, but I'm not sure that the character development necessarily always made sense. We were worked on things with Claire's mother, for example, and we get to a point where we're really not liking her, but then she does something positive, and one of the characters we do kind of like talks about how much they like the mother, and it seems like some of the story developments go against that. In terms of trigger warnings, I did not expect going into this that this book would heavily be dealing in things like sexual assault and potential pedophilia, and there are those moments, and they are somewhat on page, and there is kind of resolution in a way to some of it. I don't want to say too much because then I get into spoiler territory, but I don't know that this is the book I would recommend if you're looking for a book handling the topic particularly well. For our characters, their relationships, I feel like there was a little bit missing in terms of relationship building. We have a relationship that comes out of the story that I could see coming, but I didn't feel like it necessarily was developed enough on page. The relationship between Claire and Matthew as father and daughter was a very touching one at moments, but it also in some ways happened easier than I expected it to when it came to developing and changing over time. So in the end, I gave this one a high 2.5. There were good elements. The fact that I could sit and binge read it really easily and it did hold my attention got its credit as well, but overall not one I'm going to necessarily widely recommend. So didn't end on the highest note for this particular vlog, but I definitely got some really good reads in along the way, so I had fun with this ARC attack. I hope you did too. Let me know in the comments below, are any of these books on your TBR? Do you have any highly anticipated March releases that you're looking forward to that maybe I should be looking forward to? And if you've made it this far and you don't have anything to comment, give me a car emoji for the Good Samaritan, where Matthew begins the story picking up a boy in his car. If you could hit that like button below, I would surely appreciate it, and subscribe if you're interested in more of my ARC reviews, more of my highs and lows of reading, and more of my bookish content in general. But for now, I'll go ahead and leave you here and see you real soon in a new video.